All right, and welcome to another edition of The Educator's Voice. I am your host, Frederick Keenan, and I have again another wonderful, amazing, almost like I guess she and I grew up on the same street together, so family almost here. I have Katrina Johnson, who's going to be our guest tonight, and we're going to have a good discussion about education. So I will not, as always, not do a bio about Katrina. I will let her do that with the first question, which is tell us a little bit about your current position. What are you working on now, and where you are as far as education right now?
Okay, thank you for having me, Frederick. And yes, it's like family. So this is open court, I would say.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Currently, I work as an administrator, a school administrator in a middle school in Spartanburg School District 7. In Spartanburg School District 7, I've been with them. I think this is my 11th year, maybe going on my
Oh,
12th year.
wow.
I have to go back. And I started being an assistant principal at Pine Street School. I was there for a
Hmm.
couple of years, moved my way into a K-8 school as principal at EP Todd School. That school is still there, but the K-8 concept is no longer in existence because what they did is they broke down the middle school portion of it because I think after years of trying that, the district saw that it was more beneficial that they would break the middle school part up, and now we only have two middle schools. I then moved during COVID from being the principal at AP Todd School. I moved into a position with the district at McCracken Middle School as the coordinator for student services at McCracken Middle School. We didn't know at the time COVID was coming. So
Hmm.
what we did is we monitored and adjusted. I was taking over the virtual school where we no one in the district or anywhere else knew what virtual school really looked like. So I was in charge of all of the virtual students at that time, at the same time breaking down EP Todd School from a K-8 with the Montessori concept and breaking down the middle school. So some of the students choiced over to McCracken, and at that same time, the term social and emotional wellness was
Uh-huh.
very high on the educational ladder because people were wanting to know if students were well, the teachers were well, all of the stakeholders in the district, as well as the parents. How is your well-being mentally,
Hmm.
socially, and physically? So
And rightfully so after COVID.
yeah, so we this was during the process because this was a heightened term. It was buzzwords within the educational system at the time. So when I was moving over into that position, that was the part that I was going to focus on. But COVID interrupted, so I had to again monitor and adjust. So I was the LEA. I served as the LEA. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the LEA. That's the local educational. That's the representative. That's the person who sits in the meetings if you have any students who receive special ed services, any 504 accommodations, you sit in the meeting and you are responsible for ensuring that the teachers and the parents receive the same guidelines. They just receive the same understandings of what that student may need individually if that student has qualified for special services or if they have a 504, which is a medical diagnosis, and they may receive accommodations in a classroom. So I sat in meetings for all day during that time for a couple of years. So last year I was still looking. I wasn't sure which way I was going to go in education because COVID, I had had enough. I had not enough of the K-8 concept, but that was a lot in being in charge of pretty much three schools in one because EP Todd
Hmm.
had the K-8 concept. It was Montessori focused, K-3 through fifth grade elementary. Then you had your Gen Ed, K-5 through fifth grade, and you also had sixth through eighth middle school. And all of these students were in one building.
Hmm.
So that was a lot, but hey, I learned a lot and it was a lot to take in, but I wouldn't trade it for the world because it gave me a different lens on how the elemental is what they called it. The elemental concept is, which most of the time you have those in rural communities where you don't have to have more than one building and you put all the students there and it's more like a family community. But now it's only two middle schools in District 7, and that's Carver Middle School and McCracken Middle School.
Okay,
And
so I'm going to interrupt you for a little bit because that phrase K8 model keeps a little bit confusing me, and I don't want to sound like I'm ignorant. But
oh no.
so what is, explain to me a little bit more in detail. What is the K8 model, and what does that mean, and why did it change, and all that kind of stuff?
Well, the K-8 model is just what it is. It's kindergarten through 8th grade. So you have
In the
in
same building?
in the same building. So there was
Mm,
K3, and that's 3-year-olds who would come from probably 8 in the morning till about 11:30. That's half
mm,
day. And
mm,
they had they were in Montessori. So Montessori is a different form. Maria Montessori, she is the creator of the Montessori methods. And those children, they learn differently because they learn more independently. And what they did is they started the students at K3. And if you were in K4, you were able to stay all day. So K3 through K5 Montessori students were all in one classroom. And you'd
mhm.
have to know about Montessori and how the students learn because some 3-year-olds are able to do some things that 5-year-olds are doing and vice
Sure.
versa. So those 3-year-olds would leave, but you had to be potty trained if you actually were accepted into that program because it's still public school. And the Montessori students, they learned a different way. They didn't go through standardized testing because they don't believe pretty much in standardized testing. So we had the Montessori and the Gen Ed, kindergarten through 5th grade, and then you had your Gen Ed 6th through 8th grade. So
Okay.
at that time, it was about 267 middle schoolers, 6th through 8th grade, and then you had the rest that were all elementary.
So now you said that we only in District 7 have just a Carver and McCracken because they don't
Yeah.
use that model anymore with having everybody in one building.
Well, not the K-8 concept, but there
Okay.
is the kindergarten through 5th grade, and they have Montessori focus at that elementary school. So they're
Okay.
still there, and it's great. I love elementary school students, and I love
Hmm.
middle school students. So that was where my forte was with elementary and middle school students. So when I moved over in hopes of creating something new, COVID hit.
Got
So
you.
that's I started monitoring, adjusting, as I said, to do something else. So I was kind of doing three things again in one with the virtual school, serving
Yeah.
as the LEA, and that's when I sat in meetings with all of the special ed students. But it was great because we did what we needed to do to get through COVID. So I continued in that position for the
Mm.
next 2 or 3 years, and then this past year I served as the 8th grade assistant principal because what we did, a new principal, her name is Dr. Woody. She's awesome. She came in and she asked, she said, "Hey, she said, are you going to still be here? I know that you're looking for something else." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure because I'm not sure where I'm going to go or what I'm going to do. It just depends." So at the end of the summer, pretty much, I said, "Hey, yeah, I'm ready. I'll come back. I'll do whatever you need for me to do because I'm skilled at that. I can do it." And
Sure.
she said, "I need you to watch over the 8th grade, or not watch over, but to be the admin for the 8th grade." So I said, "Okay." I ended up getting back into the swing of things. Didn't think I wanted to still do education after 2 years ago, but I know for now that's where I'm supposed to be.
And so now you're in assistant principal role.
Yes, and that's at the middle school. So this year I'll serve as an assistant principal, and then I'll just do 6th grade. So, and her
Okay.
focus is to move up each year. Don't know where I'll be if
Well, I was
I
going to ask, is there any hope on you moving up to principal at some point, or is that not in the?
back again. I don't know because again, my goal, or at that time, I was moving into another role, but COVID hit. I was still in the same position serving as the LEA, and then last year I still wasn't sure which way I was going. I wasn't sure if education was going to be it because after so much
Sure.
up and down, I was like, okay, maybe I need to pivot. But my pivot was to put a period on, yes, this is where you need to be. Exactly where, and I feel good because I'm able to pretty much polish things and
Hmm.
kind of stay behind the scenes at the same time and actually move forward because being in this role, I can help the people that are new
Hmm.
come in, and I know exactly what it needs and what needs to happen so that the school can move forward and the
Now we're
children.
now we're kind of jumping the gun just a little bit because you've piqued my interest a little bit here, and I'll
Okay.
get back on track in a little bit here. But So at some point, it sounded like you were saying that you weren't sure. I think I heard you right, that you weren't sure if you wanted to continue in the path of education. Is that what I heard? So what happened with that made you feel like you weren't sure, and what made you finally decide that you want to just kind of stay into it?
Well, after, as you noticed before, I talked about being in the K-8 school. That
Mm-hmm.
was my first time becoming a principal. And I went from being an assistant principal at an elementary school to becoming a principal at an elementary and a middle school
Mm-hmm.
and having a Montessori focus.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that I wasn't ready, but it was to say that you can never be prepared enough to take on a role such as that because
Sure.
you're balancing three things,
Yeah.
three different concepts at one time. Now I did it and I did it with fidelity and I would do it all over again. However, that we weren't sure at the time that that school was going to remain the K-8 school that it
Sure.
was. So
Okay.
pushing that focus, you had people who had been in the district and been in that particular school, because some of those students, I think the last group of students who went through that K-8 concept, they graduated last year.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
the school actually stayed K-8 concept for 10 years straight.
Wow.
It was a great concept at first because you had all of your children in one building. So if you had, say, you had children, you and your wife had children, and you had a fifth grader, you had a second grader, and you had a middle school, you can do a one-stop drop and that's it.
Yeah.
However, at the end of the day, there were two dismissals. So you had two dismissals, one at 2:30, which was elementary. And if you had students who had older siblings, those students stayed in the cafeteria. They didn't pay for an after school, so therefore someone had to stay there to watch them for 45 minutes. So who do you
Hmm.
use? You use the teachers or the administrators that were there. So they couldn't go back to an office or take care of any other after school assignments. So they waited until the 3:15 bell, which was when the middle schoolers were dismissed.
Yeah.
So
You,
then
you
the
you that term has got me thinking again. So I'm gonna have to really do some research about that because I'd never heard of the KA model before, and I
Mhm.
don't think as a parent I would want all of my children in that range of age all in one building.
Okay,
I
and
mean, that sounds like a lot to me.
it was a lot, and it was good for what it was worth, and who it benefited. But your building, to me, in my opinion, I think your building needs to be conducive for that, because when you're in middle school, you're a bigger student. You sit in a bigger desk, you take up more space.
Sure.
You want to go into a gym where there is a lot more space, where the goals are separated. You can run and you can jump. So you had to deal with discipline issues in an
Sure.
area where you're trying to logistically keep one side of the building
Hmm.
away from another side of the building, and you have
Yeah.
to have monitoring all the time. So I thinking back, I start thinking, well, was that a good move for me? Because you have to think, wow, it opens up your eyes. Someone asked me about, and this is something different, but someone asked me about the difference between a president and a vice president.
Hmm.
And I said, well, those are two different roles. The role of an assistant principal and a principal is totally different.
Hmm.
Totally different. You serve as an administrator, but they have two different roles at the time. So people have to know which road they're traveling on. So
Sure.
dealing with all of that in one building at one time continuously, that was a lot. And that was a
Yeah.
lot for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
lot.
I can see how that would be very overwhelming. I would
Because
not
it's
want
two
that.
Yeah, it's two different
Yeah.
disciplinary codes. The code of conduct is two different ones. So you have to remember, okay, these are elementary students. They don't get the same infractions that a middle school student does.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, so you're balancing constantly.
Yeah. All right. So I want to just step back just a second because that was great to description of what you're doing now. But like I always do with my guests, I would love to go backwards just a little bit to talk about, your upbringing.
Mhm.
What made you get into education in the first place. So if you would just talk a little bit about Katrina Johnson when she was living on the same street I was living on, and what your upbringing was like. Just kind of briefly tell us about that, and then what made you get into education in the first place.
Okay. Well, as a young child, you have these dreams and aspirations of becoming someone famous. And
Sure. Sure.
I've always been into fashion. I've always been into decorating. I've always loved to do those things. So my initial what I want to be when I grow up was I was going to be a fashion designer,
Oh
and it
wow.
the label would be called simply Trina. But as you
Mhm.
grow older and you become wiser, you
Mhm.
start learning what your niches are. And I've always been the babysitter. I've
Mhm.
always had children around, and I had two older brothers, as you would know, and I found myself telling them what they should be doing or how they should be doing. So it wasn't that I was trying to, but maybe it was just being the baby sister. I always had a reason to say, hey, I think this is the rational point. So as I grew older, I had two things because when I was younger, we would stay at my grandmother's house during the summertime, and I would always find a special little, it was a nook, I would call it, and it was a Singer sewing machine. I don't know if you
Mhm.
remember that. It had the pedal on the ground.
Mhm.
And my grandmother had one, and my great grandmother had one. They lived right beside each other. And me and my cousin would always play school. So I knew at some point either I'm going to be that fashion designer and I'll turn it into teaching. I didn't know, but I always had a love for reading. So my auntie, who worked at B. Dalton Bookstore, she worked at B. Dalton Bookstore, and she was a manager there. So when I became old enough to go to the mall, when you could hang out at the mall,
Sure.
and your mom and your dad would take you to the mall, you could only stay at that time. I thought I was being dropped off, but really my mother was on the other side of the mall, and she was waiting until I walked around. So me and my friends, but I would go into B. Dalton Bookstore, and my auntie would always have books. She would bring me Raggedy Ann books, Nancy Drew, and the
Mhm.
Hardy Boys. So I read those books all the time. And I would have a stack of those books, and I would play school, and I would give my cousin
Wow.
some questions to say,
Mhm.
okay, what happened next in this book? So I found myself becoming a teacher. And becoming a teacher, I never really thought, because again, it got to high school and I was like, well, I'll probably be a fashion designer. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to go live
Mhm.
where my grandfather lives so I can buy things, because I would always redress the mannequins in the in the mall. Because when my
Yeah.
mother would go shopping, I would take the clothes off, and we went to this one place, Rich's department store. Do you
Uh-huh.
remember that?
Uh-huh.
This lady would always allow me to undress the mannequins and redress it because I felt like they don't have it dressed right. So all of those things, as I look back, it kind of brought me to being who I am and where I am, and teaching other people, because not that it had to be my way, but I always found another way to look at things. And
Sure.
I had an older brother who he struggled in school, because and he would tell you he would struggle with reading because he didn't want to read. He didn't want to read, and one, that he was stubborn. But back then people didn't take the time to say, hey, look, okay, maybe this may be your issue. Sometimes
Mhm.
there's a block with other people. So going through life, I just found myself always helping people. And also the fact that I grew up with in a family owned business where my dad and my mom, they continuously help people. We would always People would come to our house, the people that worked for my dad, and they always wanted to have something. And my mother would say, no, they don't get any money out of the change drawer. You make them a sandwich and you put it up. We would always put it out there. So I found myself always helping people. So as I grew older, I realized that that was the niche that I kept running from, because I was trying to be a fashion designer.
But yet it was kind of intertwined there because even in the mindset of being a fashion designer, you were still helping people, or at least you thought you were
Mhm.
going to help them. You were helping them look better than what they
Yeah.
looked. So you were still helping them, right?
Yes,
So
because I've always been the friend. They're like, Trina, how does this look? Nope, we're gonna turn this around and we're gonna do it this way.
yeah,
I've always had a creative flow about myself,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
didn't really know how to define it. And I defined it becoming a teacher. And becoming a
Hmm.
teacher, I loved putting up my bulletin boards, and I would take time. Even to this day, I do not like Pinterest, and I don't like Pinterest is very accommodating, it's very
Hmm.
resourceful, but it does not allow you to be creative in what you do, because I come from the era of being a teacher where you made everything. Yeah, that's very
Hmm.
time consuming, but I feel like when people see you and children see you doing something, that's how you learn best.
Sure, sure,
And all of that, and I put everything in a nutshell because I went through the timeline in my head about what I did and what I aspired to be. I still have a really creative flow, but it takes my mind. I go from one thing to the next. But people who are able to understand, they can follow me really well. So,
sure,
and
sure,
I
sure,
I can actually connect with the person who I know is creative like that. You think globally, I can follow them because I look at what's at the end, and then I find my way and put it together. So,
sure. So at the end of the day, it all evolved around to the fact that you wanted to help people. Not
mm,
only when it came to fashion design, that was your dream. When it came to your family, your father's family business, when it came to education, it was about you embodying the idea of I want to help people. And I think that's the story of most educators, is that we get the joy of being able to walk into a classroom and be able to assist a student, whether that student be through K through 12 or higher ed. We get that feeling of helping. And I think that's what you kind of articulate there.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So let me ask this question. This will lead into the I call it the meats and potatoes of the discussion, if you will, because we talked a little bit off camera about how college is valuable and how K through 12 experience is valuable, or the fact that a lot of people don't think that schools are adequate any longer, that they're teaching our kids what they should be teaching them any longer. A lot of folks think that college is a scam. You go to school, spend all that money, go in debt, and you wind up, like we talked about off camera, with all these degrees, but yet you're making a job or working a job that is under your value, right? There were some stats I read a few days ago that in our country, more than 50% of college graduates are underemployed,
Mm,
which means they are working in a field that had nothing to do with their college degrees. Now, that's over 50%. So a lot of folks are thinking, well, if that number is that high, then why do we even keep continuing to preach this dream of, oh my God, go to college, it's going to make your life somehow better, when that is not always the case for everyone. And I've talked to lots of guests before I talked to you. I've talked to Dr. Booker, Lyman Dawkins, Marquise Clark, and they've swayed my mind to the idea that, yeah, that's one side of it. That happens, but there are reasons for that happening. So I love you to speak to us about what you think about the value of K through 12 is, what you think about the value of higher ed is, and kind of debunk some of these people who are saying that now school is broken and we need to probably dismantle the whole entire thing and start over. So speak to
mm.
those folks who think it's not valuable.
Okay, and I've spoken to a lot of people. I'm not one of those people who say that school is not valuable, because a school is what you make it. The world is a classroom, and you can learn wherever you go, whenever you go, and it just depends on who is teaching you and who is inspiring you at the moment. And I'll give you two reasons. I went through K through 12. I went to college, went off to college, went to um, even attended college while I was home and married. And they're very different versions of how you receive school during the times of your life. I think that
Sure.
there are steps. There's steps to matriculating, and when
Mm-hmm.
you matriculate, you should, but it just depends on your surroundings, and it all depends on what you're giving. I think that as children, I tried to provide a an educational experience for my children, even more so than what my mother and father gave to me, because my
Mm-hmm.
mother and father they didn't do the traditional route of people going to K-12, then going off to school. My mother and father were married by the time they were, what, 18, 19 years old. Back then, that was normal because that's what you
Mm-hmm.
did. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people say, hey, there wasn't enough room at the house, so people got married, and
Sure, sure.
my mother came from a family of 10. My father came from a family of 7. So they went off and they did well. My mother went back to school. My dad is a man who never went to college past. He went to high school and that was it. He became very successful through his hard work. He is what you would call a blue collar worker. But my mother, she had a more education than he did when it came to formal school education. But I would not put their experience. I wouldn't compare it to someone who did college right after high school, went off, and they gained all of these degrees, because I still think that it's valuable, because when you are matriculating and you are
Mm-hmm.
able to take those steps, you are able to receive things that you need at the right time. Now, some people take a different route and they still come out and they're as successful. as the next person. But I think what
Yeah.
we do sometimes is that people get a closed mind of what that success should look like. Now, my take on people saying it's invaluable versus you don't have to go to school, I do think you should go to school. I do think you should expand your educational scope on things. I do
Mhm.
think education is truly a mindset, and I think you've read my book, and
Yeah.
that book
Yeah.
only gives a glimpse, and that's more for not only adults, it's for children. It's a children's book,
Hmm.
but it's a children's book with an adult view in it
Hmm.
too, because you probably could understand it because you know my story,
Yes, ma'am.
so
Yes.
you understood it. And my dad, who didn't go to college, always told me, y'all are going to go to college and you're going to do better than I did. But in someone else's reality, I don't own a business. My dad owns a business.
Yeah, and that was gonna be my point. I didn't want to interrupt you, but that was gonna be my point too. When you mentioned about your dad owning his own business, there are a lot of folks who go to college who don't own their own business.
Right.
There are a lot of folks who can't say that they pulled themselves up and they made and they don't work for nobody. Everybody that goes to college is eventually gonna work for somebody.
Right.
Right. And it's ironic that it's the entrepreneurs of the world who are going out like your dad and starting their own business who wind up hiring the college graduates,
Yeah.
right? So that speaks a lot to the fact that maybe, and that, I think that's why folks say that, do I really need to go to college if I'm gonna end up working for somebody anyway? Why not do like your dad and just go start my own thing, start my own business without that college degree and be successful that way? And I think that's where a lot of folks can decide on whether they think it's good or bad. And maybe it's not for everybody. Maybe your dad didn't need to go to college, but your mom
Mhm.
did, right? And I think it depends upon the individual person. Would you agree with that?
I think it depends on the individual person, and I also think it depends on the support systems and the resources that you have around you. Because during the time my dad's owned the business for 53, 54 years, people don't start businesses like that anymore. There are
Right.
people who have started the same type businesses and surpassed him because they've
Hmm.
had resources that he didn't have 50 years
Sure.
ago. So
Sure.
his some of his ways may be antiquated compared to the people that come straight out of college. They know the resources, and I think that's what school and college gives to you. You're
Sure.
able to put your hands on things a little bit quicker. They're a
Hmm.
little bit more accessible to you
Hmm.
because you have that expanded mindset, and
Sure.
you have to be around people smarter than you, who know more
Sure.
than you. You only get that if you are educating yourself. And again, in my book, it talks about education. And when I go to visit schools, when I do consult work, I tell them this is all in what you make it.